Hi, and welcome to the Hearth Matters podcast. I'm Erin Szuma, and I'm here with my co host, Kathryn Lukas-Damer. Kathryn and I met earlier this year when she was just about to launch a new nonprofit. And after hours of really great conversations like the one we're about to have with you today, she invited me on as her co founder and executive director. We're super excited to share what Hearth Matters is all about, so thanks for being here. Okay, Kathryn, let's get started with the basics. What is the hearth and why does it matter?
Uh, I guess that's the right place to start. So we're using the word hearth to represent the home environment, and to go a step further, the domestic sphere. And for a little more context, the hearth really starts as a campfire a couple of million years ago when our species learned how to control fire. Richard Wrangham, the Harvard anthropologist and primatologist, said in his book, Catching Fire, that the ability to control fire and cook food made us the modern humans we are today. And this is in large part because our brains have doubled in size since we started cooking our food. And when we brought our campfires inside, we called it a hearth. And so, in the modern context, even though many homes may not physically have a hearth or a fireplace, for many of us that are familiar with the term, it evokes the images of the things that matter most to humans: warmth and safety, care, nourishment, love, children, family, community. And perhaps most importantly, for most of human history, the hearth has been a woman's domain, and this is what our nonprofit is focused on.
Yes, it is. Specifically, our vision for the nonprofit is a world where mothers and householders are empowered with the respect, knowledge, and resources they need to create nurturing homes, and where every child receives the essential care they need to thrive. And the way we're going to try to bring our vision to life is with our mission, which is to improve the social and economic status of those who provide care in our homes with practical 21st century solutions.
Right, right. Hearth and home have undergone massive changes since women left the domestic sphere to work in the public sphere in the 60s and
Mm.
70s. And Western women have made incredible gains in the public sphere over the last 60 years. I mean, they've achieved amazing levels of education and equality and financial independence that our grandmothers, our great grandmothers could only dream of. But we believe there's been a price. We've had to leave the domestic sphere largely unattended in order to accomplish all of this. And in many cases, we've outsourced the care we used to provide in our homes to the market economy. And we think there's a connection between this significant cultural shift and many of our modern ills.
That's right. And not many people are making this connection like you have, Catherine. If they are, it's mostly in a religious context or in the desire to go sort of back to the way things were.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're about. We're both center left thinking, we're strategic problem solvers. And so that's the approach we're taking rather than a religious or, say, a wishful thinking stance.
Right, right. And it's interesting that until recently, feminists, the group of people who you would think would be most likely to make this connection, are they're missing in action when it comes to
Right.
matters of the hearth. They tend to focus on women's labor issues in the public sphere, and their strategies are largely market oriented.
Mm.
The women speaking up for home have largely been conservative, religious women.
Mhm.
And while many feminists show outright disdain for full-time mothers and householders. And so they have inadvertently, in some cases overtly, marginalized the labor in the home with their rhetoric. And it's not paid labor, so it's not worthwhile. It's boring
Mhm.
and monotonous and so on and so forth. But here's the thing, all women work in the domestic sphere, and most of us straddle both spheres
That's right.
today. After working 40 hours a week in our market economy jobs, many of us come home to work another 22.5 hours or so in the domestic sphere. And it's not sustainable
Mhm.
for anyone. Women are experiencing record rates of depression. Our kids are struggling with alarming rates of obesity, illness, and depression. And And let's face it, our men aren't faring much better. And,
Hmm.
and as we said earlier, we do think there's a connection between the marginalization of care by feminists and many of our modern ills. And of course, there are many other factors at play, right?
Sure.
But another one that we've identified that we think is really important to talk about is the outsourcing of our homes to the market. Homemade has been replaced with market made in many of our homes. The quality and the care and the wisdom of homemade has kind of disappeared. And in some sense, there's this a lack of leadership in the domestic sphere because we've lost sight of the importance of it in our ability to flourish as a species.
Right. But, feminists are right to point out the economic vulnerability of full time motherhood or householding. It is a real issue that many women my age, myself included, are struggling with. I mean, it's something that I've had to come to terms with as I make this transition from full time employment in the public sphere.
Right. And this is really where our initiatives shine because we want to solve these problems by really looking at them. Feminists haven't made any progress on solving any of these issues. Academics are great at pointing out problems, but they don't seem to be able to come up with meaningful solutions. For instance, there's been a movement around for, I don't know, 40 years or something, and they demand wages for labor in the home, but they don't say how that might happen or who might pay for that labor, except for maybe employers or the government. And that's not realistic. The organizations working on paid family leave, they've made exactly zero progress.
Yeah.
So again, they're market solutions in the public sphere. Our initiatives are really entrepreneurial and they're focused in the domestic sphere. We're
Hmm.
focused on practical strategies that actually make a difference to mothers and to householders, to the people who nurture and care for all of us, for the people who ensure our survival as a
Yeah.
species.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, Catherine, all these things that you're speaking about are exactly what drew me to your work in the first place. When we met earlier this year in March, I was looking specifically for the job that I could do as a mom. I had caught full blown baby fever and I was just planning for motherhood. Now I'm pregnant with my first and I was looking for a job that I could do from home. I could do around my children's schedules. I could avoid the expenses of childcare and I could be present and available with my children, much in the same way my own stay at home mom had been with me and my siblings when we were growing up. I was in HR at the time and I was pretty miserable. I had struggled for many years throughout my 20s to find a job that brought me happiness and fulfillment. And so I knew that I wanted to put my kids first, but I also wanted to do something to earn not a ton of money, but enough money to foster our family's financial resilience in the case that my husband's income wasn't able to cover us. I mean, we're very, very fortunate that he does earn enough for me to stay at home, but I was never really comfortable with the idea of bringing in 0 income whatsoever. So as I started to think about what to do next, I began to notice the ways that our moms are portrayed in our culture and to
Right.
hear these feminist and careerist narratives repeated by myself and so many women who I knew, who I saw around me, who were either completely dismissive about the idea of having children or who were super anxious about the proposition.
Right. We've
We'd say
internalized it.
things.
We've all internalized it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You'll hear things like children are career killers and
Hmm.
kids aren't worth it. You're going to lose your identity when you become a mom. And
Yeah.
I had bought into them. But now with this full blown baby fever upon me, I thought, well, hey, wait a minute. Most of us find our jobs to be soul sucking. I was miserable. And I think many of the women that I knew around me were feeling the same way. At the same time, most of us want to have kids at some point in our lives.
Right.
Now, as we said, the concerns that we have about modern day motherhood aren't completely unfounded. I had seen so many moms struggle to balance their careers with their desire to spend time with their children. And on top of it, they were taking home so little money after paying for childcare.
Right, right.
But that's when I started thinking, okay, it's 2023. We see all these different ways of making money that are flexible, remote. Why shouldn't women, given all of these advantages, be able to have it all? And so that's really the first time that I envisioned my dream job could be working with women to do what I was about to do for myself,
Hmm.
which is pivot their careers so that they better integrated with their vision of the type of mother that they want to be working in the public sphere or otherwise. And so when we met, Kathryn, and you started to describe these Hearth Matters initiatives, I thought, number one, these are programs that will benefit all women in all types of family situations. And number two, you completely opened my eyes to a new set of careers in a sphere that most of us aren't thinking about at all, which is the
Mhm.
domestic sphere. So for me, joining Hearth Matters and making this huge career transition means I get on a personal level the flexibility and the remote job and the meaningful work that I was looking for. But more importantly, what gets me so fired up about Hearth Matters is that we are creating real pathways for women to make a living from their homes while raising kids, just within this once hidden domestic sphere, rather than being limited to just those jobs at Google or the marketing department, whatever the case may be, all those public sphere jobs, right? So that's my why. And I can't wait to dive into our initiatives. But for now, Kathryn, what's your why? How'd you come up with all of this, and why did you decide to start Hearth Matters?
Yeah, it's so great to be working with somebody literally half my age because I'm looking retrospectively. I have a 40-year-old son, right? I'm looking retrospectively at a lot of this and you're looking forward and I think that's part of what makes our partnership so great. It's certainly valuable for me to be able to feel like I'm helping women your age, which is really
Mhm.
what this is about. I've spent my entire life making food for people and I've pretty much always been an entrepreneur. I come from an entrepreneurial family. I was a chef. I had a restaurant in Germany. I worked in executive management for a time, hated it. I founded a food company, successful national brand. And then I wrote a cookbook with my son. I co authored it with my son.
Mhm.
And like a lot of us, I've been watching the health crisis very much linked to food, to our diets unfold like everyone else. But I really have had a front row seat. And it's been part of my interest, part of my inquiry to how we got here. I've also really been interested almost my entire life in the history of food and traditional foods, and specifically women in food. There weren't many women in the 90s when I started cooking in the food business, which I always thought was interesting. Like in the restaurant and hospitality industry, it's men mostly at the helm. That's changed quite a bit now. But when you would go into traditional cultures, it was the women who
Mhm.
held that knowledge and that they were keepers of this wisdom, right? And of these food traditions. And in the early 2000s, I went on a bit of a walkabout and I traveled back to Europe. I went through China and Thailand and South America, and I was mostly studying traditional foods. I was interested possibly in writing a book about it. And I spent quite a bit of time in Peru and South America, but mostly in Peru. And I was also in Bolivia and Brazil. But while I was in Peru, I met an amazing group of women who let me make an ancient fermented drink with them called chicha. And I ended up doing a TED Talk about fermented foods in 2020. But I didn't realize at the time, 20 years later, that their stories and that experience would inspire me to start Hearth Matters.
Mhm.
And yeah, so just to go a little bit further, I noticed that the women in these villages were so revered for their traditional knowledge and their wisdom around the hearth. Food making, medicine making, taking care of children, community relationships. They're often the people who were managing the interpersonal relationships of the community. But I noticed a disturbing trend, and this was 20 years ago. As these cultures modernized and women moved into the market economy, this type of expertise just seemed to like lose its social status. And I hadn't connected it yet to feminism or the market economy. But I remember thinking, this is really off, especially because these are the skills and the practical knowledge that are required to
Right.
run our homes and to take care of our families. I mean, this is the stuff that propels humanity forward. These are the skills that ensure our species survival. And I in 2016, when my tenure at my company ended, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my realizing, I guess, probably the right way to say it would be that I had used a lot of male energy
Mm,
to work in the business world and to become successful in the business world. And I was thinking about all of the women in modern cultures who practically apologize for being full-time homemakers or moms,
yep.
and why those of us who work in the public sphere have more status, even though full-time mothers and homemakers are doing arguably more important work. Why does our culture value that more? And I became obsessed with this question, and that's how I did a lot of research over the course of many years, and that's how I started to realize that feminism and the market economy had sort of inadvertently played a role in marginalizing care
Mm,
in our
right,
homes, and
right.
and that eventually led me to start Hearth Matters.
Yeah, so now fast forward today, and I think we could say that we've both come to many of the same conclusions, but from pretty different perspectives.
Right, right. We both, believe strongly that home and hearth really do matter. We also think that as we turn the corner on the information age, a new era, and we're still dealing
Mm,
with a lot of industrial era issues, we still have a
yeah.
lot to think about, sort out with our dyads, our relationships, all kinds of things that we're still trying to figure out how we manage our homes, how we work in the public sphere. There's a lot to figure out. But
Mm,
we think that together, women in the public sphere and women in the domestic sphere, or women who want to work in the domestic sphere, we can leverage our gains in the public sphere, all of our knowledge, to dramatically improve our lives in both spheres. So we really believe strongly that now is the right time to rethink and to revalue and to reinvent home and hearth.
so, yes, let's talk about how we're going to do this through our initiatives.
Yeah, well, before the industrial era was the agrarian era, and we talk more about this in a future podcast in our chat books, which we'll say what that is in a minute. But when we were part of a cottage economy, work and home were very much intertwined. And so taking inspiration from cottage industries, but merging the cottage industries of the agrarian era, but merging that with the information era and the technology that makes it possible for us to connect with anybody anywhere in the world at any time, we want to reignite the entrepreneurial spirit of home. So one of our initiatives is business training programs for home-based cottage businesses.
Mhm,
And the goal of this is to help people escape the two-income trap, which we will talk
mhm,
quite a bit more about in future episodes, and also significantly reduces the economic vulnerability of full and part-time householders and mothers. So we're talking about gig work from home, but we're
mhm,
going a step further, and rather than working maybe for someone else, you start your own business in your community,
mhm.
and your services enrich your community. So it's not necessarily a Google tech job that you're doing from
Sure.
home.
Yeah.
There's already plenty of knowledge around how to do that. There are people doing that, and we learned a lot about that obviously during COVID
And
too.
there's so many people who are interested in it. We know that like half of Gen Z is looking for how do I set up my own business so
Yeah.
that I can work for myself. So the demand is there and we have those examples in the gig economy jobs.
Right, right, and, there are a lot of new laws, around home restaurants, and there you can start a natural food company from home, childcare from home. You can do domestic sphere types of jobs from home that really enrich your community and help
Mhm.
women who are working in the public sphere with more homemade options
Right.
for them, and so we really are talking about a partnership between the women who are in full-time market jobs that they love and the
Sure.
women who maybe
Mhm.
many jobs are going away, or they just don't like their jobs and they want to do something else and they want to be home with their babies, jobs that really will help them flourish. And so business can feel a little daunting for a lot of women, especially if they're not college educated or they're not maybe entrepreneurial. That's what we want to do. We want to really simplify the process for people with our program. And it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be daunting. It can be very simple when you make it from home. It's nothing like having to create a business in the market economy.
Right.
So that's one of our most important initiatives that we'll start with. We also imagine building what we call a 21st century cottage economy. So we have a neighbor to neighbor network model that reimagines and upgrades our ancestors' cottage economy. So what we call it the domestic economy. So our model unites producers and consumers in a home-based sharing economy model. So it prioritizes human flourishing, but it also makes a lot of financial sense. And when you have a bunch of these neighbor to neighbor networks, they form a domestic economy and it coexists with the market economy. So we're not talking about you don't have to join an intentional community or we're not talking about disrupting the market economy as much as we are adding to it with a new type of domestic economy. And various versions have been tried in the past, but they tend to be too expensive and they tend to be hard to organize. But technology makes it much easier to organize. And our model is fairly simple. And we'll be working with real moms and and this also works for men. Like, this is not just exclusive to women. Anybody who wants to be a full-time householder who wants to participate in neighbor to neighbor networks, we want to prototype with them this model.
Mhm.
And then a fourth, this is probably going to be the following year, but we really believe that it's time to bring home economics back, to upgrade it and maybe merge it with something that we're really interested in called Bildung, which it's a Scandinavian educational philosophy that showed up around 19th century. And so we want to it was about building whole people, self-authoring people. We'll talk more about this later, but upgrading home economics to help people figure out how to like find the right partner. A lot of women haven't even held a baby at age 30, right?
Mhm.
And we haven't even talked about the fact that birth rates are declining pretty rapidly. And so we want to sort of address that here also with
Right.
human flourishing. We want women to understand their fertility curves. Instead of saying at 35, oh, I'm thinking about having a baby. It's like, well, your chances aren't
Right.
great. It's
Right.
possible, but it's
Right.
not great. And most of us, we just don't, we're not even taught this
No.
anymore. So just understanding women's fertility curves. So education is going to be a really, really big part of what we want to do. And now it's possible to aggregate online classes from the best thinkers, from the best education systems around the world. I'm hesitant to say universities because they're only a part of the
Right.
education model now with
Sure.
information age sort of education models. So we want to aggregate those, combine them with our own hearthology. We call it hearthology curricula that teaches human flourishing,
Yeah.
all the skills
Right.
required for human flourishing,
Yeah.
like cooking and childcare and interpersonal relationships, and we have all these amazing tools now around understanding our own operating systems, understanding our own psychology.
Right.
This needs to be taught to young
Mhm.
people, but to everybody. It needs to be open sourced and it needs to be taught in the context of these are domestic sphere, private life, domestic sphere skills that are just as important as anything in the public sphere. The public
Yeah.
sphere takes
Right.
dominance over everything in our lives because the market drives our lives now. And
Right.
so we're really sort of preaching leadership in the domestic sphere, knowledge in the domestic sphere. And so we really embraced the philosophy of early feminists who viewed home as a sanctuary,
Mhm.
away from the sometimes alienating forces of the market economy. And they saw home as a place that required loving and skilled leadership, and they saw the roles of householders as essential to human well-being. So
Right.
our final initiative is what we're doing right now with this podcast is to reintroduce and amplify this perspective in our cultural consciousness, through our podcast, social media, speaking engagements, strategic partnerships. We're working on a book, our chat books, which we'll talk about in a minute. And we also want to actively engage with tech leaders to ensure that their
Yeah, right.
technologies are aligned with human flourishing. So,
Right, right. Yes. I mean, what the early feminists who were thinking about home were doing was advocating for the domestic sphere as a sanctuary, specifically during a huge transformation
right.
in the market, in how we work, and in technology. And so we want to create that space for the domestic sphere as we navigate the AI revolution that's coming for us, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I think
Which, by the way,
exact
some experts think that after AI has replaced a lot of our work, that the two skills that will be that AI can't replicate, which are really domestic sphere skills, is care and creativity. And this is
yeah.
what women excel at. I mean, this AI could be an incredible boon for women and for home life for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, we have so much to celebrate and to cheer for and to look forward to, and ultimately, that's what this podcast is all about,
Mhm.
is we wanna interview guests, experts, and ordinary women who are thinking about these issues and who have solutions to help us create this brighter future that we really all want for ourselves and our children. So, I think, Catherine, before we wrap up, let's talk about chapbooks because it's kind of a new might be a new medium for folks who are just listening to us right now.
Yeah, yeah. So I was starting to write a book, and then I realized it might make sense to break up some of these ideas into smaller format. So a chapbook is today it's mostly associated with poetry and that sort of thing. But really they're 16th century forms of storytelling. Authors who couldn't afford to print a whole book would often print chapbooks. They're usually small and printed and not a lot of money goes into them usually. And then there was a period where they were beautifully illustrated, but essentially, it's grassroots storytelling. That was the original intent, and so we thought, what better way to convey some of our ideas instead of like a white paper? Why not do a digital version with photographs and a lot of images and make it fun and a little bit more interesting? So each one of our chapbooks, we have three of them at the moment, are about 15-minute reads. The first one's called Hearth Story. The second one is Householder Feminism, which we've not gotten into yet, and the
Mhm.
third one is domestic economy, which we talked a little bit about. And so, what we're going to do for those of you who prefer to hear us talk through the content of the chat books, our next three podcasts are going to be focused on those chat books.
Right.
Excuse me. So, our next podcast will just go through the Hearth Story chat book and so on and so forth. These chapbooks go into more detail about how we came to define the problems that we've been talking about and the problems we're hoping to solve. And also we go into a lot more detail with our initiatives.
Right. Right. Awesome. And you can find all of those for free on our Substack. It's www.thehearthmatters.com. And I think that's a great place to leave it for now. Thanks so much, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. This has been fun.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.